All eyes will be on President Biden today as he kicks off the NATO summit in Washington. House Democrats are holding a restricted caucus meeting as calls for the president to step aside from the presidential election continue to rise. Senate Democrats will also meet today for the first time since the debate. But President Biden is ramping up his efforts to save his re-election campaign. Last night, he met virtually with the Congressional Black Caucus, whose members apparently, according to the White House, are sticking by his side. Meanwhile, the president's physician, Dr. O'Connor, releasing a letter overnight detailing his examinations of President Biden, and Parkinson's expert, Dr. Kennard, reportedly visited the White House 8 times in 8 months. O'Connor says that Kennard examined the president for each of his annual physicals. O'Connor writes this: "The results of this year's exam were detailed in my February 28th letter. There were no findings which would be consistent with any cerebral or other central neurological disorders such as a stroke, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ascending lateral sclerosis." In a testy exchange with the press, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre refused to confirm Dr. Kennard's visits. Watch.
Wait. Hold on. Wait a second.
Eight times, or at least once, in regards to the president specifically.
We have to keep their privacy.
It's public information.
I hear you.
And you're going to allow this to fester longer, Karine, unless the White House answers the question.
Hold on a second. There's no reason to go back and forth with me in this aggressive way.
Miffed around here about how information's been shared with the press.
I answer the question that you guys asked.
Correctly, didn't have to come back and clean it up.
I never answered the question incorrectly. That is not true.
Can you confirm whether or not the president has seen this Parkinson's specialist?
Has the president been treated for Parkinson's? No. Is he being treated for Parkinson's? No.
Clear yes or no, has his physician seen a reason to reevaluate him for Parkinson's since the February physical?
No. The comprehensive report that you all have stands.
Meanwhile, former President Trump weighed in on Biden's mental fitness last night during an interview with Hannity. And despite all of the panic, President Trump still believes that President Biden is going to be the Democrat nominee come November. Watch.
It looks to me like he may very well stay in. He's got an ego and he doesn't want to quit.
What do you make of all the talk that if Biden steps aside or is pushed out, that it would be Vice President Harris? Do you expect that much would change?
I think that it will be her. I think they are very concerned about the vote if it's not her. They are very, very, they're gun shy. They don't want to do it any other way. I've actually come to believe that's what they're going to do. I think she's an ineffective person.
Michael Balboni, it might be harder than people think to actually push Biden out, especially since he's got Hunter Biden now in all his meetings, and Jill Biden, the First Lady, and Hunter are really digging in. Here's Miranda Devine and Senator Eric Schmidt from Missouri with me on Sunday. Watch this.
I think people haven't quite given the significance to Hunter Biden's presence in the White House that it deserves. If he is in control of his father, as it appears he is effectively the commander-in-chief by proxy. And that's a very frightening thing for the country. And so anybody from the Democratic Party who's going to try and dislodge Joe Biden this week has got a very worthy adversary there. I think it will be very difficult for them to tackle Hunter Biden, especially if they underestimate him and don't realise really the kind of control and manipulation he has had for a long time over his father.
I don't think he's going anywhere. I think the people who have a lot of power by Joe Biden being in office in this sort of shadow government, they're not going to let him resign. And by the way, if he decides not to be a candidate, he certainly isn't capable of being president. The media has helped cover this story up for years. And why did they do it? Because they thought Joe Biden was going to beat President Trump. They thought they could bury President Trump. And now when it looks like President Trump is actually going to win this race, which I believe he will and been saying it for a while, they've turned on Joe Biden. And so it's really fascinating to see the very people who were asking Joe Biden what kind of ice cream he likes for 3.5 years suddenly are shocked by his lack of coherency that everyone saw on that debate stage that night, and no one can unsee that.
Michael Balboni, your reaction?
So to have Hunter Biden be within this proximity of the President of the United States really undercuts a bunch of different messages. The first is, so you've got a convicted felon sitting there right by the president. So what do you say about Donald Trump? Second is that he was convicted on a gun charge. So what about the Second Amendment now? How does that change your perspective? And the third is he's going to be tried for tax evasion. So the whole pay your fair share message, how do you do that when you've got somebody who's right next to the president and advising him?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The president's going to need to calm a lot of nerves today, from foreign officials to his own party, who've already expressed worries about his fitness following the G7 and the debate. This is all coming as the Wall Street Journal this morning is revealing how Biden's inner circle worked to hide his aging on the world stage. This new report that the Journal is reporting on details a time that the president missed a meeting with the German chancellor because he had to go to bed. German officials, aware of Biden's fatigue at night, writes the Journal, sought to accommodate the president by planning a June 2022 event with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in the early evening. But still, Biden did not show up, surprising the chancellor and his aides. Instead, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken arrived and announced that Biden had to go to bed. Now, the State Department is denying this. Mark, the State Department says Blinken did not say that. There's no way Blinken said that he had to go to bed.
I bet you he did. But look, I mean, when we kind of look at the inner circle trying to deceive the American public and hide Biden's cognitive abilities, they sure as heck didn't deceive us. I mean, we've been talking about this now for 3 straight years.
Yep.
We saw what everyone is now seeing, and the wolves are circling. You know,
That's right.
As I mentioned earlier, the Biden campaign is losing mega donors. You have, first of all, Senator Mark Warren, who was putting together a group of senators who think Biden should step down. Yesterday, I watched the interview with Congressman Adam Smith with Jake Tapper.
Yeah.
And my biggest takeaways from that interview, basically what Adam Smith said is that Biden, you know, is not even running the country. He stripped Biden of all of his accomplishments and said that was the Democratic movement, and then implied that the country is being run by a president by committee. The Democrats, not Biden. So completely stripped him of all of his accomplishments. And I thought that was very telling as to who's running the country right now.
Yeah, it was interesting to look at that video there from the G7 when Giorgia Meloni had to pull him back. There's Obama walking him off stage. I mean, all of this has been front and center. And while Joe was in Washington, First Lady Jill Biden is now going on a campaign blitz on behalf of her husband. She had a testy exchange with reporters during which, watch this.
Do you have any message to House Democrats who are calling for your husband to drop out of the race? How are you feeling about the state of the race?
All right, lady. Why are you screaming at me? She's saying, Michael, your reaction. Vote cover girl.
Since it's her first time on the campaign trail, I mean, come on. That's the interaction with the press. So I don't know. Obviously, you see the pressure that's happening to everybody in the Biden circle. But the thing that really worries me right now is what is the message to our enemies? What are people looking at? You're only going to have a crisis from 9 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Don't do anything else. You can't function beyond that. The message now in a very dangerous, dangerous world, that's exactly the wrong message.